Hello.
Hi.
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 Hello.
I'm curious about.
I'm curious about
I'm curious
about
building open, authentic, loving relationship.
I'm curious about jealousy.
I'm curious about polyamory.
Does it just mean that you're fucking all the time?
How can I tell my parents that my partner is already married?
I'm curious about.
How do you know when you're too busy to have another relationship?
I'm curious about dominant, subordinate relationships.
I'm curious about sexual health.
How can relationships evolve with people as they grow and change?
I'm having a thought, this person is overreacting. And then NVC tells me, look, that's because something in you is unmet. So what is that? If I'm thinking someone is overreacting, what needs of mine aren't being met?
Welcome to Curious Fox Podcast. This is a podcast for those who challenge the status quo in love, sex, and relationships. My name is Jacqueline Moisello.
Hi, I'm Effy Bloom. On this episode, we'll be talking about nonviolent communication, or NVC, with Dr. Clara Moisello. Clara is a brain scientist by training, turned NVC facilitator, and she's also an important part of the NYC NVC program as a coordinator, a trainer, and a mentor. Clara is also the creator of Move, Nourish, Connect, a framework that supports people in developing a loving relationship with their body and with food. Her passion and former work as a neuroscientist informs and inspires all her activities. She's also a long-term fox and a friend. Welcome, Clara.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited and grateful to be here with you today.
We are very excited to have you. So this topic was scheduled way before we have been impacted globally by COVID-19. And as we were preparing for today, I continue to think this is exactly the topic that we need to be talking about right now, because I imagine that for those of us who are in homes with our partners and families, or those who are separated from partners or families, that communication can be strained. And so I'm very much looking forward to having a conversation with you around how we can improve the way we are communicating, both with ourselves and with those around us.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think I don't know what I would do without this practice in these days. So I am absolutely really thrilled to be able to share it with as many people as possible, and with the Curious Fox community in particular.
So let me ask, your family's in Italy. I just want to check in and make sure that everyone is doing well.
My family is doing well at the moment. Of course, they are strained by the situation. All my family is actually in the north, so it's there in the region that's been most affected. But they're staying home, and I connect with them on a daily basis to keep track of the situation. But yeah, thanks for asking.
I'm so glad.
just to sort of let everybody know, we normally record things in the same place. So Jackie and I get together, we invite our guests over, and we get comfy on our couch. We set up the millions of wires that it takes to make this thing work. And this time we're actually recording from our living rooms over some virtual tech. So it's going to take a little bit of getting used to. It's going to take a little bit of getting used to who's speaking, when they're speaking. So we'll just see how it goes. And hopefully the listeners, our amazing editor will help us out afterwards. And then our listeners will give us a bit of a break as we figure this stuff out.
So that also means that not only will you be hearing us, but you may at some point be also hearing the streets of Brooklyn through our windows. So,
right.
We're covering all different areas of Brooklyn.
I have like a construction site right in front of my window, so yay! Okay, we'll hear from that as well.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if we can just start with some context, because in the bio, neuroscientist, NVC facilitator, really focused on now supporting people with their thoughts around their body and food. Can you give us a sense of the journey? How did you get into the NVC work, and why was this something that you were drawn to?
Absolutely. It was really coming from my personal journey in some way, because I came here from Italy to, to do my research. I was a graduate student when I moved, then I got my PhD here at City College, and then I stayed to work as a postdoc. And I found that environment quite challenging, actually. I mean, I loved science, but the environment per se was quite competitive and aggressive. And back then, and I'm talking about almost 15 years ago, I was much younger, and I didn't have many communication tools at all. And so the environment of academia here, with its competition, with its kind of rhythms, I was feeling very, very challenged by, and unable to express myself, and struggle in the environment of the lab that I was working. And so I just really started looking for tools for myself. I wanted to be able to express myself assertively, and yet, compassionately, without being aggressive, but yet I wanted to be heard. And I think back then, and before learning NVC, I used to be very, I'm making hair quotes, conflict avoidant, meaning that in general, in the presence of conflict, I would shut down. And I would do, and I would kind of tend to comply most of the time, but being inside very frustrated and very unhappy. And so I wanted to learn how to navigate conflict in a constructive way, and that's what really NVC then taught me. So I found NVC as I was really literally googling things, and that was about 7 years ago, and I found that there was an organization in New York, the New York Center for Nonviolent Communication. And I reached out. I said, can I volunteer? Can I intern? Can I do anything to just be able to learn this work? And they said yes, luckily. And so I started learning and studying with them. Tom Bond is the founder of the organization. And and at that point, I had almost been in the lab for maybe altogether almost 7 years, and very unhappy. And of course, and there were challenges in other spheres of my life as well. But I think in the workplace was, for me, where they would come out the most. And so I had been there for 7 years, and I found this work, and through the awareness that I got through this work, within 1 year, I resigned from my job, and I took a really big leap, because at the time I was teaching yoga, and you all know how sustainable that can be in New York City to make a living through teaching yoga, and doing very, very little work for the organization. But then, it kept growing, and over time, I started sharing this work. I started facilitating workshops and mentoring people, and it's been, I had no regrets whatsoever. It's been the most kind of wonderful shift in my life. And then the other thing you mentioned, I've always been very passionate about understanding our issues with our body and body image, and as someone who struggled with that for most of her life, and so I decided to then bring the NVC approach in the body, and also kind of translate those techniques to also be non-violent in our relationship to ourselves. So that's the other side of my work. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so interesting, because there's a similar journey that I have as it relates to the work in non-monogamy. Similarly, I think I was in the struggle, was also Googling things at some point, trying to find resources, came upon Effy and Curious Fox. Similarly, again, started to go to events and workshops, reached out, was like, how can I get involved? And now, years later, same with you, kind of taking on more of a leadership role. And so I think that's just an interesting story point to share for folks who find those moments as a part of my work. In addition to Curious Fox, I do coaching. And so a lot of the coaching is around career coaching. And so I think that's why that strikes me, because when you lean into something that you care so deeply about, that you are in search of it and hungry for it, that you can often form a career around it when you really put yourself in that space and immerse yourself with it. And so I'm interested in, we've referenced NVC and you've talked about the importance of it in your work. Can you give us a basics, nonviolent communication? What does that mean? And what are some of the core components of NVC?
Absolutely. So the work that is known as nonviolent communication has been developed over several years, actually, and it originates by a guy named Marshall Rosenberg. Marshall Rosenberg is no longer alive, but he was a psychotherapist, actually, and that was that operated in the US. And I think he developed the work of NVC probably over the span of several decades, starting maybe even from the late 70s, probably, I believe. But anyway, the work then was kind of took the shape that it has currently, mostly in the late 90s, early 2000. And so the work of NVC developed as also answering the question of what is that supports us humans, connect with each other, and what instead gets in the way of that. And I think Marshall particularly looked at how does our language play a role into that. And it plays a role into either supporting connection or creating a barrier to connection. And so NVC developed as a set of skills and tools that can help us notice when our communication gets in the way, and then gives us a way to remove those blocks. So it's both kind of developing an awareness of that and then have an alternative, with the idea that often, I think what we observe is that often when we experience pain, when we are in pain, we express that pain in a way that engenders more pain. Like that we have sometimes we don't have effective ways to communicate what's not working in us or for us in a way that others can be able to listen to us. And so often the way we express our pain comes through blame or criticism or aggression or or other or demands or other ways that then may create resistance, more pain, and they do not inspire other people in cooperating with us. And so, but the point is we need to be able to, it's not that we have to hide or suppress our pain. We want to be able to talk through things. And I think NVC gives us tools or a way to do that in such a way that the listener or the person in front of us is more likely to be able to listen, and then maybe together we can find a solution. So that's, and okay, I haven't yet mentioned any of those skills, and I'm pausing here for a moment to see if this was, what you were wanting to start, or if you want me to go a bit more into some details of how NVC does that.
No, I think that's a great intro. I think that as we go through, I'm going to be asking you more questions, but I love that kind of framing of it, that it's a more collaborative way of identifying needs and strategies as opposed to someone kind of driving towards what they want and going blindly towards that it sounds like it's something that is happening now in collaboration, both with yourself, your body and your mind, and then with the people who are around you.
Yeah, maybe the one thing that I feel like mentioned as there's really a core idea that I think supports the entire practice of NVC, and this is an idea that I invite everyone who's listening to feel it out. See, like, is it something that seems to make sense to you or not? But the idea at the heart of NVC is that all what we do can be seen as an expression of a core set of human needs that we all share. That we all what we do is an expression or an attempt to meet needs. And when we're gonna meet for our workshop later next month, we're gonna definitely dive more in depth to that. But needs are like abstract qualities that we want to experience in our lives, ranging from connection, well-being, peace, meaning, creativity. So we all share these qualities, and everything we do is an attempt to meet these needs. And generally we call, in NVC, we have this, we call these things we do our strategies. And so we pay a lot of attention to this distinction in NVC, because following from this distinction, then we can say, whenever we experience conflict happens at the level of the strategies that we use to meet our needs. Conflict happens at the level of what we are doing to meet our needs, and not at the level of needs themselves. And so a core aspect of the practice of NVC is being able to kind of backtrack to the needs. We often see, something happening that we don't like, and maybe we can play with some example. But
Yeah,
yes,
an example I think is a sort of a way to put context. The example that I like to give people is to make it really, really basic around, hunger is a need, and what you're doing with that, like eating is a strategy, and what you're eating, when are you eating it, who you're eating it with, and those are strategies, and that if there is conflict, it's around how are you going to meet that need of hunger, not the fact that you're hungry.
Yeah, that's a great example. And so I may have different preferences also on food. I may like, maybe a certain, I may like Italian food, and you may like maybe another type. And if you, and I think, that's a great one, because in general, we don't get too nasty with each other about food preferences. But if you translate that, that parallel to, to other aspects,
I did your class I did a class that you taught for Curious Fox, and that was amazing. And that was probably I think that was, to this day, the most popular class, the most popular workshop we've ever done, actually. So but kudos to you. And then I took some of your other classes with NYC and VC organization. And one of the things that you get in those classes is this magical, what I call it, a cheat sheet of a long list of needs and a bunch of words. It's essentially a vocabulary list, or I like calling it a cheat sheet, and I use it with my clients sometimes. And then another list of feelings, and we can talk about that in a minute. But in the needs list, one of the things that really struck me is, like you said, there are a common set of needs that ultimately everybody has. And some of them that my initial response was like, oh, I didn't even consider that a need. And that made me think that it's probably because it's a need that's often easily and without any effort met. Mm-hmm. Like hunger is a great example. So we live in we're privileged people living in the first world with abundance of food. So you don't necessarily think of hunger as a need, because you're hungry, you meet it straight away. And I find that the complexity becomes around needs that are not necessarily so abundant, and they're a little bit more on the abstract side, especially, like needs around connection, needs around fairness, some of the more complex kind of needs that are, I think harder to express and to sort of to figure out. What are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's definitely, in general, we tend to notice things when we're experiencing maybe some pain around them, and so that shows up. And I think, though, it's in the practice. In my practice, it's become also nice, yes, to notice and celebrate those things that we may take for granted at times, and not even be aware that especially in times like this, I feel like it could be interesting to notice. Sometimes I just go through the list of needs and just to feel those qualities in. But I hear what you say, in that we may be more familiar to the things that we're most sensitive. And ultimately, the list, to me, it may be not even an exhaustive list, and we may have even different sensitivities to different needs. But I think that cheat sheet, as you call it, which I love. I love to. It's kind of is actually Tom, our founder, calls it like a spec sheet for life. You know, like it's our specification sheet of how our life is going, and yeah, it's what we have in common. That's also a core idea in NVC, is that idea that if we're humans, we have a lot in common, and this is what is in common beyond, race, behind religions, behind our country of origin, beyond our choices in terms of relationships. There's something that's in common, and needs is that something, or at least I think the very unique aspect of NVC has been to capture those qualities, and to create that list of names that or collect, let's say, not create, because it's not that it was made from scratch, but to identify those qualities as our common ground, with the idea that if we are able to see each other at that level, if we are able to see each other at that level, then from that place we can create the life we want. We can cooperate, and NVC really holds a vision for everyone's needs to be considered. Like if in conflict, there's in conflict, we come maybe with two very different strategies, and we work on finding the underlying needs, and then come up with an even different solution that can address all needs together. Yeah.
What I like about the example of food too is that it gives you an opportunity to think about the connection between needs and feelings, which is what we're saying is on that sheet, and that unmet needs can potentially trigger particular feelings, or met needs trigger particular feelings. So if I am hungry and that is not addressed, there will certainly be lots of emotions that are expressed that are different than if I had eaten, right? So I may show up as more irritable or less patient, or, there may be some consequences physiologically and emotionally to my unmet needs versus when my needs are being met. And so that's interesting to me in terms of the connection between those two things.
Yeah, absolutely. And in NVC, we have this kind of idea where there are two major ways that we can become aware of whether our needs are met or not. And one you just named, it's through feelings. That there's a very basic correlation between needs and feelings, meaning that when our needs are met, we generally feel well. There's something pleasant that happens, and of many, it can be happy, joyous, or relaxed, or centered, or comfortable, or excited, but something pleasant and expansive. Whereas when our needs are not met, we experience something unpleasant, and and again, it could be from anger to sadness to fear to irritation to loneliness. So there's this is one way. And in fact, we say feelings are messengers of needs. And they almost like an inner compass that immediately tells me something is going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other signal is through our thoughts. And this is maybe is a little more interesting to explore, because I think we're less accustomed to see that, to see our thoughts and to see how they may relate to our needs. There's the idea that when especially, let's say, when our needs, when we're in pain or our needs are not being met, we may form a judgment thought about the situation. So we may think, let's see if we can come up with a relevant example. Maybe it could be interesting if you observed, and I'm asking myself as well, any judgment thought coming up in these days as we're
oh, sure. I can give you tons of it. I'm like, what do you need? I'm a source of examples. Self-judgments, judgments of others. Like, let me give you the menu. Which one should we go through?
Let's try a judgment of others.
Mhm.
And then maybe we'll play also with the judgment of self.
Yeah. So in this particular time, there could be judgment around how people are potentially are reacting. And so, for example, in one case, I have one partner who is maybe showing up, and it actually changes, I think, throughout the course of the day, but maybe showing up more concerned and fearful and more, how are you doing? Have you taken your temperature? How is this? How is that? Or what's going on? And then another one who's like, everything is fine. Let's go for a walk. Everything's going to be great. And then that may change throughout the day. But there are certainly different things that are being expected of me that I have judgments around.
Perfect. So that's a great example. Thank you. So let's say we're thinking someone is overreacting. That's the thought, right? So, and then we see we're it's interesting. We say, there's in a way I want to say there's no such thing as an overreacting person, which may sound a little provocative, but what we say like is the moment I'm thinking someone is overreacting, something is going on for me that is not working. I'm seeing something or I'm listening to something, and you already kind of described actually pretty accurately what could be maybe someone, checking in on you and a certain number of times or asking you to do, whether you checked your temperature and so something is happening. I'm having a thought, this person is overreacting. And then NVC tells me, look, that's because something in you is unmet. So what is that? If I'm thinking someone is overreacting, what needs of mine aren't being met? Let's reflect
I would say
on that.
need for calmness, maybe need for autonomy. I can like I'm like an empathy machine. I'm like,
Peace of mind.
Need for control.
That's an interesting one. So that's the and I'm glad you mentioned it, because the control or power or domination or all of those qualities in NVC, we don't consider them really needs, but they're strategies that probably attend to deeper needs, and maybe the strategy to control or to use kind of power over could be again maybe to have a sense of safety or security or order. So I think yes, we named a few, and if I'm valuing calmness and peace of mind and maybe even perspective and awareness and so there are needs. At the same time, I can also look as to, okay, what's that person? What could be their needs in that moment, to express the way they are expressing. What could be actually, I'm asking you if you want.
Safety, I imagine, or peace, also peace of mind. Now, what's interesting is, and I'll tell you where my mind went to automatically when you were like, well, what needs aren't being met? My instinct was to go to, well, what needs of my partners are not being met that they are showing up that way, as opposed to what needs in me are not being met that I am reacting in this way, that I'm reacting with judgment. And I think that is really something that I in this work have to pause with all the time, because I show up at first as what's happening for you that this is going on, as opposed to what is happening for me that I am reacting this way. And then after addressing that, then moving on to, well, what could they be going through and how can I support them in that way?
And ultimately I need both, right? So it's I think it's interesting to notice where we may be going first, but ultimately both sides are important, because I want to ideally maybe enter a dialogue to see like, okay, how can we work out this thing in such way that that both our needs are considered and hopefully even met. So in that sense, that's what Marshall would say, that every thought, every judgment, or let's say particularly, let's say, moralistic judgment, something that kind of stems from ideas of right, wrongs, or good, bad, and like something like the word, overreacting could be. He called them tragic expressions of unmet needs, because in a way, tragic actually for two reasons. Because on the one end, imagine if you were to go to that person, that was behaving in the way you described, and tell them, like, you're really overreacting. How well do you think that would be received, especially in this time? Not really well. So usually when we communicate through judgment or criticism or any of those variations or blame, we create disconnection, right? So we lose connection. And so that's one of the reasons why Marsha would say judgments are tragic, because they disconnect. And the second reason is that person then, as a consequence of the disconnection, the person is probably not going to be as inspired to really listen to us or to cooperate with us. And that would mean that probably our needs are not going to be met. So there's kind of like a lose-lose in some way, because or if the person is going to change, their behavior is likely to come from more from a place of compliance, like the one that I was describing before from my personal history. So it's going to be coming more from a place of, oh yes, it's true, I'm overreacting, I should change, but not from a true understanding of needs. And that's why, in general,
from being shamed into it, or being controlled into it, as opposed to really coming to that on their own.
Exactly, from a place of coercion, or thinking that they're bad, or fearing the consequences, and that's not where we would want the change to come from. In NVC, the ideal situation that we envision is that change is going to come joyfully, even from an awareness of everyone's needs. And so that's the place where we would want to go, and it's a place where we arrive and go through dialogue, really.
These are, it's such a profound, it's interesting. I think people's first reaction to or knowledge of NVC is the cheat sheet that I mentioned, and a very specific language, right? And what I'm hearing from you so far is we haven't even, it's an understanding, it's a philosophy, it's a framework, it's a way of looking at life, it's a way of a filter through which you interface with your own experience and the other person's experience. So there's a lot of broader understanding and a shift in the way that we think about things before we even get into the language of it all.
Oh my God, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, and thank you, because yes, like so much yes to that. And I think I'm glad we have an opportunity to name that, because I think that's also been one of the aspects that has been, maybe most misunderstood and most controversial of NVC, because at some stages, as the evolution of the work, it has been sometimes taught more as a language model, with certain ways to express what we may. And some people, if you are listening and you are familiar with NVC, you may have heard about that model. But yes, that is not. That those are tools, those are skills, and they are supported by an intention, the intention to connect, the intention to consider, to look at the person in front of me and wanting to see the humanity there, and then to co-create change. If that intention isn't there, then it's like every tool can be either dangerous or life-serving, depending on the intention we use. And if my intention is to manipulate, or if my intention is to get to a particular result, then no matter what tools I use, even if I use the perfect NVC lingo, and then it's not gonna be truly NVC. To me, that's something what we call the consciousness of the practice versus the doing.
So, Clara, having talked about this, why would you say the NVC is so important during this time? It's like you talked about it as a tool, and as you were saying that, what I had in mind, like the thing that popped into my mind, that is pouring outside, and NVC is an umbrella. Like right now, it's a really important tool. It's to me, it's like the umbrella in the rain kind of tool. And I just want to sort of talk with you about, why is it such an important tool during these strange times, and how can we really use it to make our lives better?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think it's definitely a tool that's important in any time, but in this particular time, I see two directions that seem crucial to me. In a synthetic way, we could say, empathy and self-empathy, meaning that the self-empathy piece, meaning connecting with myself and being able to discern my needs and what I may want to do. I think it's critical as we're navigating a time of such profound shift. So everything we know is changing. We are bombarded with so much information and so many voices telling us what we should be doing or what we shouldn't be doing. And I think NVC as a practice of self-connection and really tuning into the wisdom of our body, the wisdom of our mind, to really, and the partnership between them, to notice how we're doing, what we need in a certain moment. Is it rest? Is it connection? Is it stimulation? Is it space? Because and I think that's so NVC as a navigation tool in this situation. I think it's paramount, and then communication with others in a time where we are definitely stretched thin and often, dealing with uncomfortable feelings, and so having tools that to listen to one another and kind of hold space for one another, as well as to being able, as we were saying before, being able to express our discomfort and express our pain in a way that doesn't increase or it doesn't even generate more pain. I think it's really important, and I think it's so critical in these times. I feel like to be able to make space for feelings that come up. There's a lot of energy moving, and unfortunately, in most cases, we have less ability to actually move. We've just really very literally, and so I think it's so important to find a way to to not suppress this energy, but to kind of let it flow through. And to me, NVC gives me one of the at least for me, the most effective ways to let this energy flow, which is connecting that to my needs, and let then the needs inform what I may, do about that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. This is actually a really good moment to also, I want to, because you are a brain scientist, right? You're my type of nerd. You're like a scientist who gets this kind of behavioral stuff, and I'm interested in if you got any sort of what you know about the brain, like the science of the brain, what I very novicely call the anatomy of the brain, and my little knowledge of how the brain works. It's so just to sort of see how the organ of the brain, like how is the physiology of the brain is working as we are using NVC and trying to check in with ourselves to understand what's going on with ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I want to say I'm saying all of this very very humbly, as that there's such a vast and complex topic. So I don't I know I think I'm gonna just absolutely just scratch the surface. But I think that I love to this idea of a partnership between brain and body, or maybe there's even more an idea that that the brain is really not confined to our skull itself, but it's much more diffused into our body. I think that so in NVC, or at least for what's relevant in the practice of NVC, I think that we're creating this partnership in that there are all this information that our body kind of sends up to the brain, or vice versa, that our brain sends. Our brain really is able to track all what's happening on so many different levels. We give it this name that's called interoception. So we have this ability to sense our body at the level of the heartbeat, the breathing, the concentration of substances in the blood, even the state of contraction of the muscles, and so many more variables. And all of that, is conveyed to the brain, and it actually goes into this particular area that's called the insula in the cortex, the insular cortex, which is the end where we get to map. We really have a map of our internal organs and in the inside of our body at the cortex. And then and I'm, again, for those of you who might be scientists and listening, I am super simplifying this. Please bear with me. But the idea is that, and as humans, we have this unique ability to then is basically have an awareness, a conscious awareness of this very multidimensional information that happens in our body, and then give it a name, right? So if in the cheat sheet that we're going to definitely share with you when we work together next month, there's also a list of feelings and emotion concepts. So we as humans, we have this ability of naming, and by giving a name to the emotional experience, we actually, that's the way we feel it. Actually, that's the way we get it to conscious awareness. And what does that mean is also that in turn gives me the ability to regulate that at the conscious level. And so that could be through, for example, connecting it with the moment we make the connection and we ask the question, okay, so what need is that? What is going on? What am I needing? That, of course, is a mental faculty. That's executive function that's happening. So there it's where our, frontal lobes kick in, and I may be able to, there are a lot of sort of associative areas that collect all these different informations, our senses, our interoception, and then all together I can, direct action and be proactive towards what I may be doing, so that rather than just reacting or acting habitually, I may be able to kind of ask myself, is this habit working for me, or may I need, to create a new one? I think most often when we start learning NVC, we probably have very different habits from our past, right? Of dealing with conflict, very, very different habits of responding to stress, very different habits of responding to pain. We're not used to slow down and look at needs usually. So that's a new habit that we need to create. So, and I think, so all of those are aspects that have interesting, connections or with the neuroscience. And Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's making me think about this in connection with what you were saying before around all the things that are happening in our minds and all the stories being told of what we should be doing during this time. And as you're talking, for myself, part of what was happening was, oh, I need to be more mindful of this process as I'm going through the next few weeks of not knowing what that's going to look like, which made me think about a little bit of the intersection between our work. So I shared, that I do career coaching, but it's under the bigger umbrella of change management, which is really my area of focus. And in the conversations around change, I often am having conversations with my clients around empathy and around mourning the loss of what they had, mourning the idea of what they wanted that they may not have, having empathy with themselves through the process of change, which could be really difficult. And so I'm interested in how that ties into the NVC work, because I imagine that self-empathy and even mourning of not getting your needs met have to be built into the philosophy of how to navigate through this.
Absolutely. I think that empathy, and I'm going to define it in a moment, because I think in NVC we have a particular definition of empathy. But I would say I think it's the foundation of our practice and everything starts from that. Empathy in NVC, we define empathy as the ability to actually, we define empathy as that kind of curiosity towards understanding what someone else is going through, and that in particular from the level of feelings and needs. What is someone feeling and what is someone needing on a moment by moment? And it's almost, I want to say, empathy is kind of orienting our attention towards that dimension in someone else, that it's almost like a whole body understanding. It's not just a mental understanding. It's just kind of really like tuning in and having that sense of like, yes, I get where you are and what you're experiencing, and in such way as what I was saying before, like it's from that awareness of needs that then I can come up with creative solutions. And so you can see how empathy becomes really the key muscle, because it brings us back there. It brings us back there from the many other things that we're used to do. And then sometimes when we hold that empathic space with someone else, which may look sometimes just as listening to someone silently. Sometimes it may look as like asking them about their feelings and needs. Is it that you're feeling sad and you'd like to experience more freedom? It could sound like as a more in-depth reflection of what we hear. That sometimes empowers the person to find their own road, to find their own solutions, even though we're so used to want to offer the solution ourselves. I want to fix. I want to give advice.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make you feel better. And I think it's so powerful to, the power of being simply heard and held. I think particularly at this time, I don't know, I cannot understate how critical it is to have spaces and connections that are dedicated just to that. And I think it's especially in these times where we may be sometimes confined, either with few people, maybe alone, and maybe there's less availability of certain strategies for connection. I think it's so important to cultivate, to know that we can have that type of listening and connection. Yeah.
And I think that part of, we talk about this often, taking care of yourself and making sure that you understand what your needs are and that you are focused on some self-care and going inward first is so important, because I believe that then that provides an opportunity for you to have that well that is deep enough for you to hold space for someone else. I think about when I have less energy, it's towards the end of the day. So for example, I may show up much more empathetic to my daughter in the beginning of the day than I would towards bedtime. Because at that point now I'm just emotionally and physically exhausted. And so if she needs more of me, it is much harder of me to dig deep and just sit in her pain and not try to move towards problem solving or strategizing, because I just need her to get through it so that she can go to bed, so that I can go to bed. Where when I feel more fed, I can sit in the feeling and not move her to try to name it quite yet or plan around it quite yet, and just sit in that first stage of it. But excuse me, that only comes when I am first whole.
I think the other part of that is, again, when you're saying that, Jackie, the thing that came up for me is going into problem solving mode is also a strategy, right? And it's if you're able to remain curious in that moment rather than trying to move it along. I think that, it's because you've already decided what the solution is and you want to move towards that rather than holding on to, which is hard. I mean, I named Curious Fox because curiosity is such a heart of, like, it is an antidote to so many things, and it's often the answer to so many things. And in those moments, it is again the answer to sort of remain curious in those moments, and just see what comes up, and giving other people space to kind of meet you where they're at. And there's absolutely sort of energy there. It takes energy to be that way, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with problem solving or fixing. There may be times where we're really looking for that. And, thank goodness that, there may be time where I am looking for advice from someone, and I think it's very interesting to notice that, even I think when we work with people and people even start to have a felt experience of what it feels like to be just heard and listened to without, any rushing into fixing or change what I'm experiencing, and just be present to that. That is like, wow, I didn't even know this thing existed, and it feels so good. And that can inform us as to when we may be needing that instead of, more kind of problem solving or reassurance. And that's really important. We chuckle a lot with one of my partners, because he says that he's like is always wanting to fix, and it's so hard for him to to suppress and say like, oh, I need to listen and it's I think but I think there's it's something to really try, and it's something that we put a lot of emphasis in our trainings. As soon as we cover the basics, then the first thing that we teach is really these skills for empathic receiving. And we really encourage people to create a support system in their life. We have this, what we call empathy buddies or empathy partners. These are people from my support network, from colleagues or people that I was in workshops together, that I connect with the pure intention of listening to one another. We set aside a time, we put on a timer, and then we decide who goes first, and we just listen to each other with an agreement that we're just going to be reflecting back what we hear, making guesses as, is that you're feeling this, or is it because you would need more of that? And
what does that look like for the self? Because I know we started to explore a little bit about self-empathy and mourning through change and kind of with your needs not being met. And so I understand it as relates certainly to empathy for others and showing up, giving them space. Is that translate the same way? Is it just about giving ourselves space to feel?
Yeah, I think, I want to distinguish that I'm talking of empathy both in general as where I direct my attention, and that I can do that either towards others or towards myself, right? So, and for me, self-empathy involves the added skills of really noticing moment by moment, what am I doing, where am I focusing my attention, am I being triggered, am I being activated, what do I want to do. There's when we often share that Viktor Frankl quote that says, like, between a stimulus and response there is a space, and that space lies your ability to choose what to do, and in that choice lies your freedom, because generally we default to certain ways, to certain strategies, because that's what we've learned, and so I think the ability to notice, is this really what I want to do? Is this really the way I want to answer? Is this really the way I want to operate, and create that space? So self-empathy to me, it really is, includes the ability of, noticing. And Tom, my teacher, says, the three most important words that he thinks this work has is what is that? It's kind of, what is that? And taking, for me, it also involves, and maybe this blends a bit of my yoga practice and mindfulness practice, going back to the breath, going back to the gravity in my body, feeling the weight of my body, on the chair, feeling my feet on the floor, putting a hand on my belly, especially now that the touch is being so limited, really giving myself some somatic cues, and then discerning what narratives are happening, what am I telling myself, what's going on, and then moving through, and feelings and needs, and that's a long process. It may take it may take long, but what's the alternative? I think the more I feel like, yes, it may seem less efficient in the beginning, but what's at stake? What happens if I go fast? Yeah. And you name one. I really want to name. You named mourning, and I think I wanted to say a couple of words about that, because I feel like it's critical at this time where we're challenged inevitably, right? There's a lot, where there's so much that's probably bringing us pain and resistance in us as we navigate limitations on many levels, as we navigate health challenges, possibly. There's so much, and the concept of mourning in NVC speaks to the idea that I can stay open even to my pain if I am able to, to understand that my pain is telling me about my needs. My pain is telling me about something that I value, about how much I value maybe freedom and well-being and movement and air, so that I can, in a way, almost kind of consciously experience the absence of something, but has a way to know, oh, this is me, this is what I love, this is what I value. And Marsha would say this is more of a sweet pain, as opposed as the alternative, which is a contractive type of pain that's connected with the thoughts and judgment. This shouldn't be happening. This sucks. This is terrible. This is something. This is so unfair. And that's a much more restricted and and contracted way that does not connect me with what's truly the source. It's almost kind of a resistance or pushing the pain away. And I think, to me, that feels potentially more dangerous, again, air quotes, because then the energy is stuck, or it may erupt very, abruptly, and it may, really create challenges both in the connection with ourselves and with others. Yeah.
It makes me think that the sort of again, just I'm leaning on your sort of neuroscience knowledge. There's a when we're coming from those places we're activated or triggered, we're coming from a survival system, right? Like there's essentially at the core of it all, there's fear, there's an unmet need, and there's a fear around it. And what the cost of that unmet need is going to be to us is sort of my understanding of it. And when we're operating from that place, it's our fear, the fear response, right? And we know that our fear response is fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah.
And because we call it that, I think, at least I notice with my clients and the people I work with or encounter, that because those words are so physical, they think of them literally. So it's like fight is like getting your fists up, fight is like running away, and flight is like running away, and freeze is like literally just like pausing in place, which may look like that, but it's also like there's a more of a nuanced emotional versions of those fight, flight, and freeze. And I think if you can do that, if the pain comes, you can disassociate from the pain. That would be a flight response, or you can become very judgmental about it and get angry. Like anger is a fight response, and then a flight response would be something like a disassociation or resisting or like not wanting to deal with it. And the freeze response is when you kind of turn inwards sometimes, or you go into people pleasing. It's interesting, like people pleasing is a freeze response, where you kind of want to just like, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, and all that stuff comes from like your amygdala, right? It comes from a very reactive place, where there's something like sitting with the pain and letting it go through as you remain curious. Like, this is my understanding. It's like almost like curiosity lives in the frontal cortex. Like curiosity lives in the executive brain and is really able to be online when it's not overridden by the amygdala. It's my understanding of it. Does that?
Yeah, I think, that's fear response or stress response. We have sort of developed this kind of stereotypical way, to respond to stress. You may have heard of what's called the HPA axis, which is hypothalamus, pituitary, amygdala. So those are kind of the structures that are basically involved in, a lot more probably is involved, but there's a core system involved in the, in the stress response, which is in great part an automatic mechanism of response to danger. What is interesting to remember is that has been, that has evolved in response of situations, ages ago, where the threat, used to be a real physical threat, or like an animal chasing us or something where there was the stress response really developed to be something that was very short-lived, mobilized the body to run away, to concentrate, or all the energies into running away or fighting, and it was supposed to just last maybe 3 minutes, something like that, because then either you would be safe or you would be dead. So that was kind of and it's so interesting because for a much longer time in our evolution, we've had those kinds of dangers. But now those dangers, thank goodness, I should say, are not what we meet on a daily basis, unless we're in dangerous situation. But I want to say the majority of us in some sort of, living with some level of privilege, we don't confront those kinds of life and death necessarily on a day-to-day. And so the most often we are confronted with what's more like a low-level chronic type of stress. That's about the stress of having a conversation with our partner or with our coworker, or something like that. And that has really been so challenging for our kind of mind-body system, because that's not what it evolved for. And so those continuous low grade activation has really been connected with the inflammation, with all sorts of negative impact on our health. And yes, so I think I think that when I was talking about how to let the energy move, I was really like thinking about that, we need to somehow let that flow and then go back to a baseline. How do we regulate, how do we regulate that? Well, we can act on many different levels. On the one end, when we can, changing the context or changing the situation. But I guess especially in these times, maybe that's what's less available to us, because maybe we cannot, choose to be somewhere else. We have to be where we are in our apartments, and we cannot really change what's happening at the global level. And so what are other ways that we can regulate? And I think what I love about NVC is that, to me, it is really regular. It is very regulatory in some way for me. And there's some science about that too, in terms of how even naming the feeling and naming the need can changes our physiology, almost just that. So yeah, and I think that's
yeah. And so I want to bring it sort of a little closer to home for us, which is with all this knowledge and a new sort of understanding of looking at things. We're in a very specific situation. We're stuck at home. Oh no, we're not saying stuck. What are we saying, Jackie? We have a new framing of this.
We're thriving at home as opposed to just surviving.
We are.
You can tell we're doing real well, Clara. We're like, no, we're not trapped. We're not confined with our partners.
we are socially responsible and supporting
we have the beautiful opportunity to explore who we are and the people we love in closer proximity. Yes.
So we are living indoors. We're sharing a roof with our partners, and
or away from.
And by the way, let me take this as a kind of a teachable moment, because I think it's so interesting. I mean, even the fact that we're stuck at home or we're confined at home, those are the narratives that can run in our head. Right. And to me, like, I want to pay attention, meaning that it's not that I want to ditch it too quickly, because sometimes then I get even nervous as to, okay, now I have to say, oh yes, I am, whatever alternative that is, and that may not, may not feel true. I feel like what I'm really thinking is that I'm fucking effing stuck at home, So, but then, like we were, saying before, that to me is revealing that there's something that I'm missing, that I'm longing for. That's maybe freedom and choice and space and movement. So rather than say and this is, it's a choice, of course, but I think, to me, rather than necessarily reframing that sentence, I could say wow, I'm thinking that I'm stuck at home, and that reminds me of how much I love, freedom, and I felt like that's an interesting, and then it gives me the choice. I probably, when I think I'm stuck at home, there's a certain state in my body. When I think I'm choosing to do something that, supports, the health of people around me, and I'm really, strained because I love moving and I love freedom, different places to be. So, so I felt like.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. It's perfect, actually, because, Jackie and I talk throughout the day multiple times, and I think what's also, at least I'm noticing, is because we're talking a lot and we're writing a lot, right? Because we're now in communication a lot. I'm paying more attention to our language and how we frame things, and it's very, very insightful. And when you're kind of looking at things from a frame, you're actually missing, at least you're missing a bunch of metadata, otherwise you would get, right? So you're actually just stuck with them just seeing them in a very two-dimensional way, and you're not really getting them energetically, you're not really getting any body language, everyone's kind of sitting on chairs. So like suddenly there's a stripping of a bunch of data that would otherwise come through, and now you really have to be mindful of your language, your facial expressions. Like the way that we communicate is shifting whether we like it or not, right? It's great we have this technology, but now like there's no, like, I'm a very, like, a movement person. So when I'm telling a story, I'm like usually moving around, right? And all that is lost because I have to sit in a chair. I have to kind of make eye contact through a screen and a camera. Yeah. And now I have to rely so much more on my language, so much more emphasis on my voice. And it's just a whole new way of communicating. And then language, like words, become really, really important, you know, and you really can't get away from, like, you can't sulk right now, right? So I want to just bring it back onto like relationships and non-monogamy and how it works. So this is a great example of like, you can't actively sulk right now with your partner because it's really weird to turn on a camera to then sulk. You know what I mean? So you really have to
I feel like I've done some virtual sulking over the past week. I was like, as you're saying that, I'm like, I don't know if that's true. I feel like feeling the feeling, like Clara was saying, you got to feel it. If it happens virtually, it happens in person. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you not find that? But you then have to like name it quite quickly because you can't. At least I'm finding very hard to hold that kind of like sulking energy on a video call, because ultimately you kind of, at least maybe that's my experience with a camera, but at some point you're just staring at each other. You can't walk around. Like normally if you're in maybe in an interaction at home, one of you is sulking, the other one is like there's a way that we regulate our energy as well. Like you can walk around, you can go to another room, like you can add movement to it. But right now you're kind of like stuck on a chair, in a camera, or even if you're on a couch on a phone, there is still a very much like this like tunnel that you need to manage. And I think when you're like that, sulking, at some point you need to call it what it is, because you're like stuck in a tunnel.
Okay, all right. Actually, let's use that exact example, because I have the opposite experience with that exact. So when in person, if I'm in conflict and I am not in my wise mind, I am not emotionally intelligent, my default when I feel upset is to pull myself away, is to be like, well, and like storm out of the room, and I'm upset. And I go to the other room and I just sit there and I wait. And I wait for someone to realize that I'm mad and do something about it, right? I can't do that in the same way, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
I can say like, I'm mad, and then I like via text and the person, but it doesn't have, to your point, it doesn't have the same. So I am using my words more now, but we've talked about alone together in my partnerships as well, where we will be on the phone and it will be silent. It'll just be like, I'm going to be quiet and mad on the phone until we finally get to a place where we can have a conversation. But I have found that it's better now that I have to use my words as opposed to in person when I can like stomp away and be in the other room. There's no virtual other room to go to, and the person can just live about their lives while I'm like, because they can't see me. And so I'm doing much better, audience, by the way, with that. It's a work in progress. But all to say, no, that example is very real for me. I think that's very true.
Yeah. So it's a time where we're really have to rely on our words, you know. And I want to kind of bring this a little home to our listeners who are often, you know, most of our listeners are you know, really looking at their relationships, right? We say we're a podcast for those who challenge the status quo in love, sex, and relationships. And a part of challenging the status quo, at least for me and for the team, is being actively engaged with your relationship and your communication, which is because the status quo is a very passive participation of whatever the societal prescription is, and kind of not really getting in deeper. Whereas we're kind of saying like, let's get curious about relationship, let's get curious about love and how we date and how we meet and connect with people. And a lot of our listeners are in either negotiating or in non-monogamous relationships. Some people are, you know, in one place with one partner and they have another partner that they can't see, or they have to go back and forth between households like Jackie is doing right now. And, you know, some people are separated, some people are too much together. What can we offer them from the lens of NVC that can, give people a little bit more of an understanding, maybe help them build a little bit more of a tolerance to the situation and deal with those dynamics a little better?
Yeah. I think there can be a lot of different situations as you speak, as you mentioned. So, and I think probably one would have to look in some way on a case by case to understand. But I think in the generic thing that I can say is that it's gonna really be critical to be able to, situation by situation, be able to recognize what needs are being touched and what strategies may be available or not. Because I'm imagining that there could be at least a couple of common scenarios. One where one could be where my favorite strategies are not available because maybe I am not able to be physically close to my to a partner, and so all what typically happens through touch and physical presence, like you were saying, Effy, before, sometimes when we regulate each other. Also, all of the people like myself was one of primary love languages touch. It's really hard. It's such a sometimes. It feels like nothing really would meet needs or those needs for maybe nurturing other than that. And some of us may not be able to get that at all. There's some of us that are maybe self-quarantining themselves completely, and or maybe that they're just living. I'm solo poly. I'm imagining many people who are solo poly maybe, be by themselves if they're not live close enough to to some of their partners to be able to see them. So that's gonna be an exercise in understanding. Okay, I had a favorite strategy. It's not available right now. What is the need underneath? And then can I come up with other, with other ideas? And also, can I allow myself to feel the pain of that strategies not being available? So a little bit of both. The other, the other side could be in those situations instead where maybe we are close with someone, but right now they are the only person that we're close with, and it used to be, that there were many, and we used to have, this kind of beautiful resilience of being able to go to different people, and now, there's that person, and maybe we may end up somehow consciously or unconsciously maybe relying a lot on that particular person to for a different set of needs. And I think so even in that case, similarly, to be able to recognize and to understand where which space that person is, what their needs are, what's our empathy tank. You mentioned that sort of reservoir before, so really being able to communicate very honestly as to where our tank is and where we may need pardon me, to recharge or to have space, and maybe be creative in finding ways to carve space even when we are in close proximity, and to be able to acknowledge that. But ultimately, I feel like that the tracking of what's alive moment by moment, and what is that, telling me, without being scared or without trying to suppress the feelings per se, but but also, without putting a heavy expectation on someone to be the one that meets our needs, I guess.
Yeah. What came up for me, and I think this is actually a really way to sort of come to it, is I think the qualities, the values, qualities that really is required to do this work is courage and curiosity is what's coming out for me.
Yeah.
that you really need to have the courage to face the feelings and be willing to talk about them, and to be and remain curious at all times to what is alive in you, which is one of my favorite NVC like sayings, and like what is alive in you. And I think it's with courage and curiosity that we get to do this work and able to connect with our fellow humans in all times, across all cultures, all relationship styles. It's just that human to human connection.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's beautiful about NVC. It really facilitates that human to human connection.
Yeah. And I think I was sharing, I'm recalling this example that we were chatting about before, and then maybe I'm sharing in hope that maybe also maybe resonates with some people. But I think that in times like this, it's so important to make space for feelings, maybe coming out a little more intensely. I think there's another very crucial idea in NVC, which is, maybe I'm curious how this is going to land with you, but the idea that it's not other people that cause my feelings, but it's really our needs. And so I think that's very important, in that when I say like make space for our feelings, I'm maybe part of me is concerned, and then we may just kind of yell the feelings out at someone because this is your fault, or because you make me feel like that. And as opposed as to really just acknowledge that this is an experience I'm going through, and maybe just hold my hand into that. And I know I had an interesting experience during this time, which was that, as I said, I'm solo poly. I happen, one of my core partners luckily live walking distance from me, but he's the only one. My other partners are farther, so I'm not able to see anyone else at the moment, and he happens to be close to, walking distance to also a few other of his partners. So there is a little bit of this kind of enforced asymmetry in that availability. And like a week ago or so, I was noticing, oh my God, I'm feeling jealousy in me. I'm feeling some insecurity, and I was, oh my God, that was so hard to even admit to myself, because I was like, I had all these voices that would say, what the heck? I mean, we're in this situation, and now, you're feeling jealous. This is so unreasonable. There's so much going on, and you have this, crap coming up. These were my kind of inner parts. So a very sort of self-judgmental part that came up as to, this is not acceptable. And then I was like, whoa, yeah, back to basics. What is this? What is this telling me? And how I realized kind of how scared I felt, that that maybe I wouldn't have the support that I needed, or the nurturing that I needed in this situation, and maybe felt kind of insecure and scared, and but it was interesting to notice how there was that instinct to trying to shut that down, to not feel it. And I recall at some point I had such a very liberating cry, actually, on the phone with my core partner, just expressing how painful it felt to hold that feeling, because I love my metamors dearly. I mean, I love them to pieces, and it felt so hard for me to even admit that I was hosting those feelings in me. But I think it was hard because, we're used to say, oh, that means that I don't care about the other people. Or what does that mean? It just really just means that I may be scared and needing some reassurance that, that my needs are gonna be considered. And that moment where he just held me and stayed with me through that moment, as I was really kind of sobbing and saying, like, this is so painful to even bring up, was very powerful. And then it was gone. So I think it's important that we have outlets. And, I feel like blessed that I was able to hold that with my partner itself, but at least having, friends, empathy buddies, if we go along, the way, and we get to, to have those in our lives. It's to feel those feelings, to see like what they tell us about ourselves, and to, and to be, hold them with someone.
I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that it highlights the fact that, and you shared this a few minutes ago, that this is a journey, that we are all on the journey in it, that there are going to be things that are triggering us, that there are going to be things that create some hard times, and that we have to continue to practice the tools and the self-reflection and the empathy and the listening and holding space and all those aspects of it in order to do this well. We just keep practicing and stay on the journey. And I think that, we can talk about it now and continue. We can talk about it, for hours and hours. And I think that the reason why we can continue to talk about it is because there's so much work to be done in it. And so I want to give people two opportunities to continue to explore this. One is NYC NVC is going to be hosting some online classes.
Yes.
And so we'll put the information in the show notes so that you can register. Online registration will start this week. And then you are coming back and you're going to be doing and facilitating a workshop for us.
Yeah.
So that if you're listening to this and you're saying, okay, conceptually this makes sense, I understand it from a brain perspective, from a emotional perspective, I understand, and I need more practice. I want the cheat sheet. I want to hear some real examples, and I want to work through my own examples. That's exactly what is going to happen on Tuesday, April 14th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So it is going to happen online so that it is open to everyone everywhere. And we're working closely with Clara to help translate this information. She is an excellent facilitator. Both Effy and I separately have gone to the weekend workshops. We've had her do an event for Curious Fox before. And it is very much worth your time to come and listen and to practice and to really bring your own scenarios to it and leverage the NVC framework and concepts and philosophy to work out some really real strategies and pain points, or rather real pain points that are happening for us. So that's going to happen on April 14th. That'll also be in the show notes. But I thank you so much for joining us from afar, from another part of Brooklyn, and being on the call, and for working with us and creating something. We were supposed to do this in person both today and in April, and I appreciate you readjusting. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it was such a pleasure. I feel so enlivened after this conversation. We should do this every day.
Listen, we may need to, just to keep me on track with all of this, we may need to have this every day.
And so I'm really looking forward to to our Tuesday evening together on the 14th. And as you said, yes, there's some online classes that are starting after that we are offering as NYC NVC. But of course, if for any reason there seemed to be a need for something even more targeted to the Curious Fox community, I'd be most happy to even create an extra. Those are kind of smallish classes. They have about up to 15 people to create. It's a kind of a small practice group. So I'd be absolutely open to co-create something together.
Absolutely. Always happy to collaborate with you doing anything, Clara. We learn, and you have your perspective and your way of looking at things and your tone makes my heart sing. So yes to all the offers of doing things together. And before we let you go, we do have a request. Please, if you're listening, if you like what you've just heard, if you like our programming, please like and review and share this podcast. It really does make a difference in the way that we change the noise, especially if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. If you leave us a review, one, we actually read them and it gives us direction on where to go. And two, it really helps us get on the map. The more reviews we have, the more likes we have, the more that we get listed in various lists and places. So it really helps us put us on the map. So please do that. Also, we do a bunch of other programming. As you probably know, we do workshops like the one that we talked about. We are in the process of designing some connection events where we want to look at like how our soirees would normally go and put them online and put them in a virtual room and see if we can get people to connect, to play, to move, to flirt a little and see what that looks like. We're doing all that. We're actively being very, very creative and building all that for you. And you can follow us if you want to know what's going on. If you want to join these fun activities, follow us at We Are Curious Foxes on Facebook, on Instagram, on Patreon. We are putting all our stuff out there. And we can also, we're also adding a segment where we are taking your questions. So if you have a question that you would like us to explore, you have various ways of getting in touch with us. The funnest way that we like is for you to give us a call. We're going back old school, and we're going to give you a phone number. Record your question. We will play your question on the show, and Jackie and I, and if it makes sense, one of our experts will answer your question. And to do that, call us on 201-870-0063. That is 201-870-0063.
And if you're feeling a little bit shy and you'd rather not call us with a question, you can email us. You can reach us at listening@wearecuriousfoxes.com, listening@wearecuriousfoxes.com. So there are many ways to get in touch with us: Facebook, Instagram, email, phone. There is no reason that you cannot get us your question or your feedback. We thrive on it. We create programming around it. And now in particular, because we are able to do more things virtually, we can connect with you anywhere you are. So do that. And if you have missed out on some of our programs, so if you wanted to come to a workshop and you couldn't have in the past, if you want to join one of the events that we are doing that is virtual, then I encourage you to join our Patreon. Look for us at We Are Curious Foxes on Patreon. For Patreon members, we are doing virtual monthly socials for free. We are doing a upcoming event where we are doing a pajama party soiree virtually. We may play some truth or dare. There may be some story time. Yeah, maybe some dancing. You won't know unless you're there. And one of the ways in which you can join is that you get in for free if you're a Patreon member. So check out those events via our social media, via our Facebook. If you want to be in touch and support what you are hearing, then join us on Patreon and get some of those free goodies. And as always, not only do we say thank you, but we encourage you to continue to stay curious. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Curious Fox Podcast is not and will never be the final word on any topic. We solely aim to encourage curiosity and provide a space for exploration through connection and story. We encourage you to listen with an open and curious mind, and we'll look forward to your feedback. Stay curious, friends.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.